Hello, welcome to Illinois Law, sponsored by the Illinois State Bar Association. I'm Sam Kavathis, and I'll be your host for tonight's show. Our topic tonight is talking about the juvenile justice system, but alternatives to the justice system, keeping kids out of the system, what we do with kids once they're in the system to keep them out, and when the kids finally leave the system, how we keep them out of the system, and alternatives for that. And tonight I have three fine guests to help us with tonight's discussion. My first guest is Mark Hasikis. He is a partner in his own firm. He's been practicing civil personal injury since 1976. Mark has been involved in many bar associations, and specifically, he was the past president of the Illinois State Bar Association. And Mark had a lot of activity with juvenile justice matters, and we'd like to thank him for being with us tonight. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Sam.
My second guest is Katrin Valencia. And Katrin started her tenure at the Cook County Juvenile Probation Department in 1999, was initially a field probation officer in the Lawndale community of Chicago. She then obtained her Juris Doctorate from Chicago-Kent in 2003. Following that, in October of 2004, Katrin became Deputy Chief for the Juvenile Probation in the Circuit Court of Cook County Department, where she is currently positioned. She was also one of the founding members of the Juvenile Probation Educational Task Force. Katrin, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
And my third guest is the Honorable James Radcliffe. Judge Radcliffe started his practice in 1977 as an assistant St. Clair County Public Defender. He then went into private practice for approximately 10 years. Following that, he went on the bench as an associate circuit judge in the 20th Judicial Circuit, and then became the presiding judge of the juvenile court system from 1996 to 2008. Subsequent to that, he has become a mediator and arbitrator in the Associate Dispute Resolution. He's also the Associate Director of the Lawyer's Assistant Program and a technical advisor for the Adult Redeploy Illinois from 2010 to the present. Thanks, Judge, for being here tonight.
Thanks, Sam.
As I said in the beginning, we'd like to talk to you about juvenile justice system and alternatives. But before we talk about the alternatives, I'd like our guests to give us just a brief overview of what happens in the juvenile system, who gets into the juvenile system, and just briefly how we get through the system before we get into these diversions to keep them out of it. Anybody want to start us out on that? How about the age level? Who is a juvenile for the juvenile system?
Well, currently in Illinois, anyone under the age of 17 charged with a felony, with some exceptions, falls under the Juvenile Act, and anyone under the age of 18 charged with a misdemeanor falls under the Juvenile Act. There are some exceptions where youth can be transferred into the adult court, but that's the basic age range. And essentially, it's any youth falling under those age categories that's charged with a crime is subject to the juvenile court.
Generally, it's 13 to 18, Sam, although there are some that come younger,
Right.
Unfortunately.
And once they get into the juvenile court system, just take us briefly through the system. What can happen to them in the court system?
Well, the judge, you could talk better than I could.
Well, the kid would get arrested. Okay. They would come to the juvenile court. The state's attorney would decide whether to file a case, a petition. Once a petition is filed, they would go through trial. They would have the regular standard motions. If the kid, normally about 99% of the time, cases plea in juvenile. In Cook County, they plea normally.
Downstate as well.
And they make an agreement, meaning that means an agreement with the state for some kind of a penalty, correct?
Correct. And
Okay.
so they would plea, and then they would get set for a hearing for sentencing, and then the judge usually the probation department then gets assigned a case, and the probation department would go out, interview the family, interview the schools. If the kid has ever been hospitalized, they would go get all these records. They would do what's called a social investigation.
Do you make recommendations to the court?
Yes. And so they would prepare a written report for the court, and then the judge would review that report, the state's attorney and the public defenders. We would make recommendations, like you said, and then the judge would sentence the minor.
And what is the level from sentencing? Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Well, the critical thing, too, is that the judge really gets all the information.
Correct.
That, in the years past, it was always a problem sometimes will the judge know all about the mental health issue? Will the judge know about the educational issues, family, upbringing, other problems? Had the child been battered at home? You know, all those are really critical factors, and the judge really the judges do such a good job about working hard to get that information so they're making the right disposition. I
And
wanna
then
add
once
that.
that's done, Judge, why don't you tell us what the different penalties are for the youth that could be?
Well, the court has generally, if it's a low-level offense, a property-type crime, it's a first-time offender that has not gone through one of our diversion programs. A lot of cases are handled in diversion programs, and there's no petitions filed as long as the kids successfully complete those programs. But the court has the option of supervision, which is a kind of an informal probation. Probation with a variety of components to it, depending upon the needs of the child and family. And then you also have detention, which is a localized secured lockup facility. Or you have the central DJJ, which is basically a youth prison, and we have, I think, 8 DJJ facilities. So the whole gamut of dispositional options are available to the court.
Okay. Now, obviously, we don't want the youth to get into those positions, so we're talking about alternatives. Before they get into the system, what is going on now to divert the kids from getting involved in some kind of criminal activity where they get into the juvenile system? What's going on? What are we doing these days to keep
Well,
them out?
When a kid gets arrested, we don't necessarily have to file a petition. So a kid can get what's called a station adjustment. So if a kid gets arrested, it's a misdemeanor. They don't have to actually even bring it into the juvenile court.
And when we talk about misdemeanor, what do we mean? We mean a lower level crime? Or
Correct.
Something that's not that serious?
Right.
Okay.
And so the police department can decide to have either an informal or a formal station adjustment. And so those kids can actually be referred by the police department before they even make it to juvenile court. They can refer them to community-based organizations. And so they can provide counseling, substance abuse, family therapy, those types of things. If it's not station adjusted and the case comes before the juvenile court, the state's attorney actually has gotten very proactive in terms of diverting cases. So it used to be that we would file cases. Now we're very proactive at diverting these cases. And so these cases would be referred to the Juvenile Probation Department. We would provide services to them. So they get assigned a probation officer, but it's informal. They get referred again to different agencies in the community. If they're not in school, we can help them get in school. So we're really trying to divert them from ever having to go before a judge and ever being sentenced to probation. And these are, again, low-level crimes.
Some of the programs that are really helpful, Sam, or even where a youth might be in a category of someone who might be prone to have a problem but hasn't really had a problem yet. So, and a lot of the programming that's so welcome is after-school care throughout the state, or even summertime care, where this is the toughest time for kids after school or in the summer where there's too much time on their hands. Unfortunately, a lot of the monies for those programs have been cut. Volunteers are doing a lot of the bulk of the work in those areas, and those are critical areas. That's when problems occur. So we try to avoid that in the first instance.
Okay. So those are some of the ideas that they've done for the diversion before they get them into the system. Once somebody is in the system and they get into the system, what is done or what can be done, alternatives for them while they're in the system to keep them from coming back again or helping them stay out of the system or get out of the system?
Sam, overall, what you're trying to do, irregardless of what the disposition or the program is, I think what the juvenile system is trying to do is to make a full assessment of what is needed by the youth that's in front of you and the family unit, and then design interventions that are designed to change the behavior which has led to the criminal behavior. That's really what you're trying to do in the least restrictive manner possible. That's kind of an overview of what we're doing, and all of these programs are designed to do that. One of the things that really struck me, it took a couple years sitting as a presiding judge in juvenile, is very often the kid that's in front of you that is charged with a crime is the most functional member of the family. And you really have to take that into into consideration. You can't just view the youth in isolation without looking at the environment, being his family, the educational system that he or she is coming out of, and so forth.
And Sam, it takes work to do this. It takes a customization, another way to say it, customize the approach for that youth, that family, that community, and looking in the community for other ways to deal with the problems that are in the community rather than just the easy way out was the old, 2 decades ago, we had really zero tolerance. Some youth acts out, makes one mistake, just ship them out. That's not the approach. We've learned that incarceration for these low, moderate offending youth is not the answer. We've got to take the steps in our communities largely to deal with what the issues are, attack the issues, and it takes some effort, takes some work.
And I imagine that you're talking, they're bigger cities, smaller cities, urban areas, rural areas. There are probably different type of programs that they need to address. Would that be a
Exactly.
fair statement?
Surely.
Sam, in Illinois, we all operate under the same little juvenile court act. But each, and I travel around the state quite a bit, probably not as much as Mark does, but a fair amount. And each community, their juvenile court looks different because the demographics of every community. But Cook County does a lot of great things in Cook County, and over the years you kind of adapt, you try to, I don't want to use the term steal, but you co-opt some of the good things that are going on through. But each court has to tailor their juvenile court to the needs of their particular community.
And I'll give you an example of one. Research shows that kids pick up cases during certain hours. Mark talked about summertime and after school. So we've developed what's called evening reporting centers for the kids once they get out of school. The probation department contracts with different community partners, and they go and they pick up kids from their homes so they don't have to worry about transportation, because transportation a lot of times is an issue for our kids.
Wait 1 second. We're going to take a quick break, and I want to come back and I want you to finish up on that topic because it's a very, insignificant thing. This is Illinois State Bar Association's Illinois law. We're talking about alternatives to the juvenile justice system. I'm Sam Kavathis, your host, and we'll be back in just a minute with tonight's show.
Bye, Tyler.
Bye-bye, Tyler.
Dear, it's time for serious talk
Oh?
about my daycare. When I started out, it was just to help the neighbors. But lately, it's getting to be a real handful. I need some help.
What can I do?
I need advice on more space, a loan,
What about incorporating?
and insurance.
Wait, I know who we can call.
Times like this require sound advice. Your lawyer can help. A message from the Illinois State Bar Association.
It's your fault! Never! Never!
Over and over,
Come on! It's our problem! Leave me alone! Shut up! Out!
time and again,
No! Drive me nuts! Shut up! You're the dumbest
generation after generation.
I hate you! I hate you too!
Isn't it time we stop the cycle? Now,
I hate you! I hate you!
stop adult violence. Teach kids peace. A message from the Illinois State Bar Association.
Welcome back to Illinois Law, sponsored by the Illinois State Bar Association. I'm Sam Kavathis, your host tonight, and we're talking about alternatives to the juvenile justice system with my guests Mark Hasikis, Katrin Valencia, and the Honorable James Radcliffe. Katrin, sorry I interrupted you, and we were talking about some alternative programs that we have now for after school. Why don't you finish up with that?
Yes, so the evening reporting centers are basically for kids after school. We go and pick them up so that transportation is not an issue, and also so that they're safe during their transportation, so they don't have to cross any gang lines, those kind of issues. We bring them to an evening reporting center where there's recreational activities, tutoring, mentoring, and basically to keep them off the streets. And so that, and then they feed them, and they take a nutritious meal, and then they take them home. And so this has been a very effective, cost-effective alternative to detaining kids. So instead of detaining them, we're keeping them in the community, and we're giving them some programming and some competency development. So we're trying to build them.
And we're talking about keeping kids out of it. What is the cost or general cost of having a kid in the system once he gets in there?
Well, Sam, the last figures I saw to put a kid in DJJ, which is prison, which is a central lockup, state lockup, is $85,000 a year. I don't think that's a good expenditure of taxpayer money. There are some kids that need to be in that setting. Most kids do not. So we have looked at alternatives. In St. Clair County, we've got a program called Redeploy, which is focused at kids that you would otherwise be looking at to incarcerate. And what you do is a very intensive assessment of the child's needs and the family's needs, and then put them on a very intensive probation for approximately a year. That's cost effective. It costs maybe $5,000 a year as opposed to $85,000, and the results are better. This community is safer. The recidivism rates of the kids that successfully complete redeploy are lower than the kids that come back from the Department of Corrections or DJJ.
Katrin, what does actually your department do? What does the Cook County Juvenile Probation Department do?
We basically, from the time a kid gets adjudicated delinquent, we come in and we do a social investigation and a report. So we go out and we investigate and we see exactly what this child's needs are. Once we determine that, we make the report, the written report to the court, and then we do an assessment. So we don't just focus on, what are this child's risk factors, but also what are their protective factors. So we want to see, kind of what the hook is going to be to help this kid move them along so that they don't end up incarcerated or end up in the adult system. So we do an assessment. Once we do the officer does the assessment, then they do a case plan and they meet with the family. They sit down, they go to the family's home and they sit down with him and they ask, what is it that you think that your child or the minor, what is it that you think you need to do? So if the kid is using drugs, then they'll make a referral for a community-based organization to do an assessment to see if they need inpatient, outpatient. So we're basically the eyes and the ears of the court. So the judge relies on the probation officers a lot. So when the judge sentences them to probation, we have to go out and monitor them. So after this assessment, if they're a high risk, we monitor them at a certain level. If they're medium or low, we monitor them based on their risk.
Is this every kid that's in the Cook County system gets this?
That gets put on probation, yes.
Okay.
And so those kids get monitored by us monthly.
Throughout the state, do they all have their probation departments throughout the state?
Yes, there are. Yeah, and Sam, the probation and court service departments do the heavy lifting. I mean, they provide all the information or most of the information that the court sees to make an informed determination as to what's appropriate for the youth and family. They do the follow-up. They are out banging on the doors and making sure the youth is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Unfortunately, they have. I don't know how they do it with the caseloads that they have. They have tremendous caseloads, but we have some very dedicated folks that work in the juvenile courts.
During the time frame, either during the detention while they're waiting a trial or hearings, and after they're sentenced, if that's the right word, adjudicated, what happens to the kids as far as education is concerned? What happens to youth during that time period?
When they're incarcerated
Yes.
or when they get out? When they're incarcerated, there is education provided while they're incarcerated. In Cook County, the Chicago Public Schools has a school located within our detention center.
Of course, I've seen some of the education statewide, and to be frank, there's some required GED training going on, but a lot of the staff positions for counseling, teachers, other jobs that are critical for that system have not been filled because of the fiscal crisis of the state. So it's not being fully complied with in my terms, as far as I'm concerned.
All right, now let's talk about the youth. Once they have gotten through the system and they're out of the system, how are we keeping them out, or what type of programs, or what are we trying to do to keep them out of it? What type of things are offered to youth, families to help the kids stay out of the system?
Director Bishop over Department of Juvenile Justice has recognized the great need to hire follow-up people once a youth is released from a facility, that youth needs to be tracked, needs to be mentored, needs to be guided. It's not fair that we just release a youth without any real hope of success. And there's not a real title, I guess, in Cook County. You use, what term do you use?
The parole?
Reentry.
Oh, reentry,
A
yes,
reentry
reentry
person.
program.
Or it's aftercare or
Who these mentor? You mentioned the word mentor. I mean, if the kids come out and they have a mentor, who's a mentor? Who can be a mentor? Can anybody volunteer to be a mentor, or are there people who are part of the system that are mentors? How does that work?
Well, hopefully we're going to have staff people to do this in the reentry staff. I mean, they need to have more than one hat. They're like a social worker, like a probation, they're like a reentry person, and they're a mentor. But there are a lot of programs now. We're going to have another program on the west side of the city where we have high-level college basketball and football players to be mentors for these youth. They're going to come and spend a couple of days a year, which is not very much, but to be there to show role models. These youth need confidence building. They need people to listen, talk with them. They haven't always had that. They've been victims of their own circumstances beyond their control, and there's a lot that needs to be done and can be done to help them to gain confidence, learn some sort of trade or skill, which again, I think in the whole state, south of Cook anyway, there's only one certified program for a skill or a trade that might relate to jobs in the state. That's not satisfactory with the Illinois State Bar Association. We want to see more things happen with a type of really training that's going to build confidence and build someone to be self-sufficient.
Other alternatives, scholarships, relocations, things
Yeah,
like that?
we do have what's called Project Lifeline, which is a scholarship program for kids who do very well on probation and they get off and they want to go to college.
It's specifically for kids who've been in the system.
Correct.
Okay.
And so their probation officers can refer them, and we have an interview process. They come to the interview, and we're able to provide scholarships to kids. We also, you mentioned one of the...
And the scholarships, just under, is that to college or to continue education, or what is this for?
Continued education. So it could be for vocational, it could be, it's very tailored. And they don't just get the scholarship. We actually have volunteer probation officers who mentor them and help them along the road, because they may not have been adequately prepared for college. They may struggle academically, and so we do provide that support.
And so this is the program in Cook, by the way,
Right.
Sam. It was
Okay.
volunteer dollars that came in. Unfortunately, it's nowhere downstate.
We don't have any of that downstate.
I can tell you there's
Yeah,
none of it.
it's privately funded. So.
Sam, we do have some mentoring programs in my county, St. Clair County, the St. Louis Metro East area, but it's all volunteer. We have a good program called the Difference Makers, and it's primarily deputy sheriffs and bailiffs and law enforcement folks that devote their time, their hours to help these kids out and provide good examples for them.
One of the issues also that we were coming across is that a lot of the kids wanted jobs. They wanted employment. We surveyed parents of former minors, and they said, you know what, we need jobs in our communities. So we created a pre-employment program. And so this is a program where the kids get to go and they learn job interviewing skills, they learn how to write a resume. These are practical skills that we give them. And then the second phase is we actually employ them. We find them employment. And so we partnered with different organizations in the community to employ these minors so that we can reintegrate them back in.
You also mentioned, we were talking earlier about moving some people around, relocation or things like that. Is there some kind of a program like for that, for serious ones, or for avoid gangs, things like that?
Right. We actually are working very closely with the Chicago Police Department and Chicago Public Schools and our department. For any time there's a shooting that happens in the city of Chicago where there's a youth involved, the police department notify our department, and we see if the minor is on probation. We then notify our probation officers so that for safety concerns, they'll know that this issue has happened. And we have detectives that have actually been working very closely with the families to try to reduce retaliation, because we know that whenever there's a shooting, that a lot of times there's a retaliation shooting that happens. So we're really partnering as a system with the Board of Education, with the police department, and with our department to try to reduce the gang violence that's going on.
Do they look at the youth itself and look at if there's an emotional problem, there's a family problem, there's a drug problem? I mean, imagine there's different problems while somebody gets into these systems. Is there a group that handles each one of those things? Is there different social workers or drug counselors or things like that for each individual problem?
I like to say we're a broker. So we assess it, and then we broker out what the kids' needs are. And like you talked about, a lot of our community partners, because of fiscal restraints, have either closed or reduced their numbers. And so our department has been proactive in trying to expand our clinical capabilities for the youth. So
There's a lot of good testing now, Sam. A lot better than it used to be. Thank goodness.
Well, we've gotten real
Right.
sophisticated
Right.
in terms of our screening instruments and the assessments that we're able to make with the youth and the families. The problem is that due to the budget situation, a lot of the services have been cut back. So we can pretty well identify what the youth needs and what the family needs. The question is, are the services available?
So these services, sounds to me, are really important to avoid a lot of these really costly, expensive care for the kids and also for the society in general to keep these
Well,
problems.
there's no question about it. If you can make those assessments and if you can put in place the appropriate interventions, it keeps your community safer and it's cost effective. It's a lot more cost effective than $85,000 a year to put a kid in the central lockup.
And the other key is having the information then on the, on storage and being able to share it with facilities quickly. That downstate doesn't happen as well as it does in Cook. And we're behind on that for a lot of reasons, but we need to get quicker about that.
But are we more with the computer generation, everything more apt to be able to identify the problems with this youth has had, and maybe you miss it the first time, but it's there for the system to find out the second time around?
Better in Cook.
Yes, I mean, we have one probation officer that deals with this family, and so they work in that community. So they don't work all over the city, they know that community, and so they know the services, they know the needs in that community. A lot of times they have cousins and brothers on probation, so they really know these families and know the community. And when the resources closed in the community, our department had to re-engineer and basically develop some of these programs in-house. So we have art therapists, clinical art therapists that do, art therapy with these kids. We have licensed clinical staff that do, cognitive-based research, evidence-based programming with these kids and do these kind of groups that these kids need. So multi-systemic therapy we've done, where we go actually to their house. We contract with agencies to do therapy in their house, and very intensive therapy on crisis management. These therapists have pagers, and so these are for the very high offenders that really need that. Instead of locking them up, we're trying to get them services in their homes by licensed clinical workers.
Again, the high offenders are the smaller,
Right.
very small percentage of the youth, a great bulk of which are moderate, low offending. But the other problem downstate is, unfortunately, there's an offense, and then we have a youth that goes to a facility far away, and the school records don't always follow quickly.
Well, it sounds like the alternative is the way to go than having the kids in the system. I'd like to thank my guests tonight for being on the show, Mark Haskis, Katrin Valencia, and the Honorable James Radcliffe. This has been Illinois Law, sponsored by the Illinois State Bar Association. I'm Sam Cavathis, your host, and thanks for watching tonight's show.